Well, thank you for having me here and inviting me here. It's certainly a privilege to be with you this morning at the Life Breakfast. And I think it's appropriate to begin with just a brief introduction. I thank you for that introduction. And I'll speak a little bit more about who I am and who Liberty Institute is. As mentioned, I'm the Senior Counsel and Director of Military Affairs for Liberty Institute, and I came to Liberty Institute last year. I've been there for about 18 months now after serving on active duty in the Marine Corps. And the reason that I left the Marines, which was an institution that I love and is very near and dear to my heart, but I left because I saw what was happening across our country, what was happening in our schools, in our churches, in our communities, which is an erosion of our values, of the moral fabric that holds our nation together. And I just felt that God had called me to be involved in that battle. And so I traded in the mission and the uniform of the Marine Corps for the mission of Liberty Institute in this uniform. And so who is Liberty Institute? Who is this organization that I work for? Well, we're the largest law firm in the country dedicated solely to defending and storing religious freedom in America. And our mission is really, or excuse me, our vision is to defend and restore religious liberty in our schools, for our churches, and throughout the public arena, and also recently in our military. That was one of the reasons that I was brought to Liberty Institute, was also to make sure that our service members, our veterans, and the organizations that help our veterans and service members, like the American Legion, the VFW, that their religious freedoms are protected as well. So to accomplish that mission, we have to have a vision. And our vision is really to restore religious liberty pursuant to the principles of our founding fathers. And as I mentioned, we're the largest organization that does this in America. And we have now what I call a laser beam focus on religious liberty. There are many great organizations out there that do a lot of great things in this realm, but they have a very, very broad scope. They might handle a lot of different issues, dealing with family issues, dealing with public policy, dealing with legislation. Maybe they handle pro-life matters. And that's fantastic. We support them in what they do. They're doing the work of the Lord. But our mission and our calling is to defend and restore religious liberty. And it's in these four arenas that I just mentioned. And this is our battlefield. The public arena, in our schools, which obviously I'm here to talk about this morning, in our churches, and in our military. And as you can see, each one of those pillars has a lot of different elements and components that make each of them up. So that's who Liberty Institute is. That's who I work for. That's really what my heartbeat is to ensure that every American has the right of religious freedom as guaranteed by our First Amendment and our Constitution in these areas. So why are we here? Why am I here this morning? Well, I'm here partly because it's been 7 years since Liberty Institute had a speaker come in and speak to you, which is, in my opinion, maybe 6 years too long. So I'm thrilled to be back, or not. I didn't come here last time. As Myrna said, some old guy was here last time. And I was warned not to refer to myself as an old guy. So I'm here partly because it's been 7 years since Liberty Institute has had the privilege of addressing this audience, but also because as I thought about this, and I actually was talking with my wife about this earlier this week, and my wife is also a Christian educator, and 50 years ago, I was telling her, I wasn't telling her 50 years ago, I was telling her what I was here to speak about this morning, because she always wants to know where I'm going, what I'm going to be doing, etc., etc. And I said, well, and I told her that I was going to be addressing a group of Christian educators and talking about all the things that a Christian educator can do. I remember thinking, 50 years ago, there was no need for an event like this. There was no need for a group like this. Or perhaps there was, but it probably wasn't nearly as dire as it is today. And 50 years ago, people would have been shocked if they were told that an educator, a public school educator, cannot openly express their faith in the school or in front of students, or that in certain circumstances students can't even do that. People would have been shocked. But nowadays, I look around, especially in the school environment, the academic environment, and what I see now is confusion, misinformation, and fear. So really, that's why I'm here, is because there is an environment now in our education system of confusion, misinformation, and fear, and that needs to be addressed. And unfortunately, it's a very complicated area of the law, and it can depend largely on geography. If you're in California, the law could be very drastically different than it is here in Texas. And we're very blessed to live in a state like Texas where, by and large, our courts and our policies still, for the most part, and to a large extent, allow for a certain degree of religious expression in our schools. And that goes not just for students, but for our educators. And so it's really important. I mean, I can't stress enough the importance of having Christian educators, and how much I applaud you and thank you. And I was just speaking earlier about how in our society nowadays, I think we have it backwards, where it seems like our celebrities, our actors and actresses, our models, our professional athletes are viewed as being kind of the pinnacle of achievement, and they're the people that everybody looks up to, and they get paid the most money when, and I always think about it in terms of what would have happened if our nation were to be truly at war on our own soil, or if we were to be, let's say there was a major natural disaster, or as we've seen in the news recently, there was an outbreak of some kind of epidemic of a virus or a disease. Who would be most important in terms of rebuilding our society, rebuilding our nation? It would be engineers, scientists, doctors, and teachers. Those would be the ones that immediately people would turn to and say, how do we rebuild our society? So, from just coming from me personally, I can't stress enough the importance that educators play in our communities and in our societies, and obviously I can't stress enough the importance of Christian educators. And I love your I guess, is it a slogan that if you reach an educator, you reach many? I think that's absolutely true, and that by reaching educators, you have that ripple effect that's going to spread throughout the community, throughout the education system, etc. At Liberty Institute, we often like to say that we're on the front lines in the battle for religious freedom. And while I think that if Liberty Institute is on the front lines, then you guys, our educators, are protecting our flanks. And as a military guy, as a Marine, I can tell you that just because there is a unit that is on the front line, I promise you that they will to a man will tell you that the next concern they have, other than the enemy in front of them, is who's watching my flanks, because that's really where we're left vulnerable and exposed. So that's where I see you guys is that if Liberty Institute is fighting the battle on the front lines, you're the ones that are there protecting our flanks. And the reason is because we both share a passion for future generations. We want to ensure that what we do with our lives and in this lifetime will be brought forward for our children and our children's children. There was a famous saying back during the founding of our nation, and I'm going to get flunked because I can't remember who said it now off the top of my head, but I think it was John Adams who said that I must study war and diplomacy. I'm butchering the quote, but this is basically what he said: I must study war and diplomacy so that my children may study arithmetic and science. And I believe that I have to fight this fight now so that hopefully my children and my children's children won't have to fight the battle for religious freedom in the future. Because I don't know if everybody in the room would agree with me or is even aware, but there is a battle going on in our nation for the hearts and minds of our own citizens, for the hearts and minds of our children, and the ability for them to live in a society where they have a full and robust freedom of religion as guaranteed by the First Amendment. And there are very powerful people in this country right now who will tell you that when religious freedom comes up against other forms of civil rights as they've characterized them, that religious freedom must yield. That these new civil rights that we've created by administrators in our government, that those rights take precedence over the rights that are found in our Constitution. And that's not something I've ever heard before, but it scares me to death when I hear those things. So that's a little bit about where I come from, where Liberty Institute is, why we do what we do, and a little bit of background. And I want to transition into talking about what are the things that a Christian educator can do. Well, before I talk about that, I think it's appropriate to make a few assumptions about my audience. First, I'm going to assume that most, if not all of you, I know that there are I saw a few pastors stand up, but I consider pastors to be educators as well. But I'm going to assume that everybody in this room, and I apologize if I'm wrong, but that everyone in here is a Christian educator. Whether you're in a public school, a private school, etc., that you are a Christian educator, that you are a believer in God and in His Son, Jesus Christ, and that as a result of that, you have a desire, God's placed a desire in your heart to share that with your fellow educators, with your community, with your students. And based on those assumptions, that's where I will basically park the bus, so to speak, and spend the majority of my time this morning talking about what are the things that a Christian educator can do. So there's the question, right? That's what I've been brought here to answer as a Christian who happens to be it says public, but I recognize that there are also private school educators as well. What am I allowed to do? Well, there's always your general guidelines, right? The kind of the big heavy stripes in the road that tell you, don't go outside of these lines. So here are the basics. As public school employees, whether you're administrators, officials, teachers, coaches, and I'm going to continue to go back to say public school because private schools are obviously very, very different. And most of our issues that we see, 99% of the issues we see really arise in the public school setting because private schools, as private organizations, as private entities, for the most part, with very few exceptions, retain the right to kind of govern their own affairs. But when it comes to public schools, because those are governmental entities, that's where we see a lot of these issues arise. So if you're a public school employee, which includes administrators, officials, teachers, coaches, etc., you must remain neutral. Now the problem is, what does that word neutral mean? And those who believe that Christian educators should have no right to express their faith in the school setting believe that neutrality means simply the first part of that definition, no favoritism. That's it. Well, neutrality doesn't just mean no favoritism. It also means no hostility either. You can be neither for nor against religious expression in the public school. So, but if you are going to engage in religious expression, it can't be pursuant to your official capacity. It can't interfere with performance in the educational environment, and it can't communicate the school's official endorsement of religion. So those are really the three kind of big red stop signs for every educator. That's the black and white of it, and now obviously there's a ton of gray area. And the gray area is where I anticipate that most of the questions are going to arise. So let's get into some of that gray area. That I'm addressing a group of educators, but I think we need to kind of start with the students first. So we're going to start with what can students do, because it's a little bit more commonsensical, and it's a little bit more, there's less gray area when it comes to students than there are with educators. So start with the basics, and then we'll move into the more difficult subject of educators. But with students, if a student wants to engage in religious expression, which can be simply talking about God, talking about Jesus, talking about their faith, if it's a topic-related assignment, then you can do. I've put a big green light up, green sign up there to say yes, you can do that. If it's a topic-related assignment, if the assignment is, solve the following algebra equation, and they start talking about how Jesus Christ is our Lord and Savior, well, then there might be an issue with that because it's really unrelated to the assigned task. But if it's talking about talk about a historical figure who's had a great impact and influence on your life, then absolutely that's fair. Then speaking about the importance of God in your life is absolutely fair game. Right? So something, if it's topic related and they want to engage in religious expression, that's permissible. So that's why there's a big green circle. Now, if it's student to student, however, and what if one student wants to share with another student? Well, that's why I've put the big yellow sign up there. That's kind of the caution sign, because it can't interfere with the academic environment. In other words, a student can't be disruptive during class time and simply fall back on the position of, well, I'm engaging in religious expression. The First Amendment protects my right to do that. We often hear kids say, it's still a free country. Not when you're inside the four walls of that schoolhouse. As we all remember, you're not 100% free at all times. And I often, when I taught at the Naval Academy, I would get many questions by students at the Naval Academy who were, we called them midshipmen. And the midshipmen there would want to know, well, we're at a military academy. We don't have a right of free speech. We don't have the right to, freely walk or go wherever we want to go, whenever we want to go. We don't have the right to free expression because we have to keep our hair cut short, et cetera, et cetera. And I would always just kind of chuckle and say, look, when you're at the Naval Academy and, you're in a military academy environment, let's just pretend the Constitution doesn't really exist inside this campus, and it'll be a lot easier for you. Your next 4 years. Well, actually, these were all seniors, so I'd say your last 4 years would have been a lot smoother for you if you just made what we say in the military is push the I believe button. Just trust me, But in a public school environment, students will often say, but it's a free country, I can do what I want. Well, no, not really. You can't disrupt the school environment, right? There's a purpose and a mission for that school to exist. They're there to educate. They're there to foster and nurture a learning environment. And if a student is being disruptive, even a wonderful little Christian student who wants to share their faith, which is as commendable and admirable as that is, they shouldn't be disruptive of the academic environment in order to do that. And there's a time and a place for that. And what about a student sharing to an employee? A student who wants to share or make a public expression of faith to their teacher, to their coach, to their principal. Is that permissible? Well, as you can see, I've got the green sign there with a yellow exclamation mark, which means that for the most part, yes, but there are some pitfalls. There's some landmines there that they need to be careful of. And that really, the big one they need to be careful about there when it comes to students expressing their faith to school employees is, again, that disruption of the academic environment. That's going to be one of those ones that you're going to fall back on over and over again. Is it disrupting the academic environment? Is it preventing other students from learning because this student wants to monopolize the conversation and share their faith? And again, I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with a student who has a desire to share their faith. We need more of that in our communities, as we all know. But there is always a time and a place. I mean, Paul preached that over and over in the New Testament, that we need to be discerning when it comes to that. So likewise, our students who feel the call to share cannot disrupt other students who, for better or worse, simply may not want to hear it and may feel that it's preventing them from learning whatever the material is they need to learn. So for the most part, if you're in the hallway, if a student's in the hallway and they come across their teacher and the teacher, I'm just making up a hypothetical here, but the teacher says, you've always got such a cheerful demeanor. You're always so pleasant. Why are you always so happy? And the student wants to give an account for the joy that's in their life. Well, that's perfectly acceptable. Or a coach says, young man, you've got a great attitude. I love how hard you work at becoming a better athlete, a better football player, a better baseball player, whatever it happens to be. I really appreciate the effort you put in. That student wants to tell that coach, the reason I do it, coach, is because I want to honor God and give Him, bring Him glory with everything that I do. That's fine as well. So that's why, for the most part, that's a green light. What about student expression during non-instructional time, right? When they're not in the academic environment, and non-instructional time is going to be, for the most part, anything outside of the classroom, after school, extracurricular type stuff. Well, most of these you can see are green, right? If they want to pray, so when I say pray, I just mean pray. Pray over their meal, pray silently. There's nobody that can prevent a student from praying when they feel led to pray. If they're just going to close their eyes and say a quick prayer, you can't prevent them from doing that. Although there have been in the past perhaps attempts to do so, but that's clearly protected First Amendment activity. What about during extracurricular activities? Can you have an after-school Bible club? Can you have a child evangelism fellowship club? Can there be a student-led, hey, let's just get together and talk about our faith? For the most part, yes, and the only exception, or the big exception, the biggest one would be if the school does not allow any after-school extracurricular activities, then it can also prevent a religious after-school activity as well. So the school would have to basically have we don't allow anything. But if the school allows there to be an after-school, FFA or an after-school choir, glee club, whatever it happens to be, then they have to also allow that religious activity to occur as well. Same thing goes for Bible reading and sharing. If the school allows students to read and talk about, I don't know what kids are reading and talking, maybe Twilight or something like that, or the Hunger Games, then students are also allowed to read and talk about the Bible. Graduation ceremonies. Now that's a big yellow one there. That is going to depend very much on geography. Again, that's going to come down to what jurisdiction you happen to be in, because there are a lot of places where there are some restrictions on how much religious expression can be in a graduation ceremony. Now, here in Texas, we're fortunate that we have a law called the Texas Religious Viewpoint Anti-Discrimination Act, which is a mouthful. We just call it TRVA for short, TRVAA, Texas Religious Viewpoint Anti-Discrimination Act. Under TRVA, really what TRVA does is it kind of sends out a message to all Texas school districts, public school districts in Texas, saying, look, when you have a graduation speaker, that graduation speaker is a private speaker. They're not speaking on behalf of the school. The school is not endorsing them. They're not becoming an official spokesperson for the school. They're speaking in their capacity as an individual student, as a private citizen, assuming that they've been chosen to speak along neutral criteria, usually valedictorian, salutatorian, something like that. So if a valedictorian speaker gets up to speak during a graduation ceremony, they're speaking as John Smith or Sally Johnson or something like that, not as a representative of that particular school. So in Texas, generally speaking, we're okay there, but you get in states like California, much, much different story. So that's why I've got that yellow sign there. So that, I said I wanted to start with the students. That's kind of an overview of what students' rights are when it comes to religious expression. Well, now let's get into the nuts and bolts of educators or employees. So now you start to see a lot more yellow and red when we're talking about educators and employees. Public public employee expression during instructional time. So this is in the classroom or during an actual official school function, or when the teacher is acting in their official capacity. Teacher to teacher, I perhaps should have put a yellow exclamation mark in there as kind of be careful. But during instructional time, for the most part, with very few exceptions, educator to educator is okay. Just again, going back to that, can't be disruptive, right? You have to be cautious about not being disruptive. One teacher can't barge into another teacher's class in the middle of class and say, "Hey, I really got to tell you something," and then begin sharing their faith. And again, this is kind of a put on your common sense cap that makes sense, right? What about administrator to teacher? Well, now, when I use the term administrator, really the law kind of looks at, do they have any policy-making role? Do they have any curriculum setting, establishing role? Are they the head coach and they're talking to, somebody who just started and is brand new and is, I don't know what title they would give them, but we all recognize that the head coach has usually been around for a long time and has quite a bit of authority versus the assistant, locker room towel washer, or the principal with a substitute teacher or something. When it's a situation like that, where it's somebody who is an administrator type position or an official, a school official type position, superintendent, something like that, and they're speaking to somebody who's subordinate to them, then there's some landmines there. They need to be a lot more cautious about that because of that appearance of official endorsement, right? That now the perception can be created that because of their official position, especially a position of such authority, that they're now speaking on behalf of the school or speaking on behalf of the district, and that somehow they're implying that is the district or the school's official position, what they're saying to the subordinate employee. So that's an area where if it's a friendly conversation and it's perceived as being simply a friendly conversation between two people who are real, and the administrator is not acting in an official capacity, it's kind of a and this is going to be very circumstance driven. Are they meeting in the administrator's office where the administrator is sitting behind their desk and the other person is kind of standing there with their hands behind their back kind of thing? Well, that's going to look a lot like that's an administrator acting in an official capacity. Now, what if they bumped into each other in the parking lot or something like that? Then, well, perhaps that's not during instructional time, but maybe they're on a field trip or something, and they happen to be sitting together, and they strike up a conversation. Well, that's, field trip would be considered instructional time, but they're just having a friendly conversation between two adults. It's not really a hey, I'm telling you what our position or our policy or whatever is when it comes to this. And this is one where, some people scratch their heads and say, well, why on earth would an official be sharing their faith and saying that this is the official position of the school? Well, I've never met anybody that's done that, but unfortunately, there are people out there who've challenged somebody engaging in religious expression and who happen to have the title and role of principal or vice principal or something like that, and saying, well, because he's the principal, I thought that meant that I had to believe that, otherwise I was going to get fired. It's as crazy as it sounds. That argument exists, and courts buy it. Courts will take them at their word when they say that. So moving on to employee to student. Right? If it's during instructional time, any employee, as a general matter, should not be engaging in proselytizing religious expression, however you want to characterize it, to students. And that's again because now you get into the realm of the school employee is, and this can be any employee, all the way from principal down to whoever the low man or woman is on the totem pole in that school. When it comes to being a public school employee, if they're engaging in religious expression to a student, then the courts are much more sensitive and much more protective because they view students as being very impressionable. especially when it comes to an adult speaking to them, and an adult who happens to work for that school, then there's that perception that this is the official position of the school or the school district, and the student is far more likely to believe that even than a teacher with an administrator. So if it's an employee speaking to a student, that's really a big red caution flag. And likewise, with employee to employee, so at the top there I have teacher to teacher, generally speaking okay. If there are students present, however, then it immediately goes from green to red, as you can see. And the reason for that is, once again, this notion that students are highly impressionable. And it gets more so the younger they are. So if it's teacher to teacher and you're dealing with a 5th grader, then they will be even more protective of ensuring that there's no religious expression that the student hears as a third party. Then, now if it's a high school senior that is one day away from graduating, I would still say don't do it, but obviously that's a different scenario, because you would expect that a 17 or 18-year-old that's just about to graduate and perhaps move into a different phase of life is more mature or capable of understanding what they're hearing and determining that, okay, that's just two adults talking to each other and that's not really the school's official position. But a young child who hears somebody sharing their faith with somebody else might think that they're telling them that because they're a teacher, and what my teacher says is always true, and what my teacher says I have to believe, and so on and so forth. So that's public employee expression, religious expression during instructional time. What about non-instructional time? And this is really where probably the most gray area exists, because most of us, common sense kind of dictates, okay, during the school day, during classroom time, during instructional time, I don't even have time to, to go around expressing my faith or sharing my faith. I'm busy doing my job. But what about after school? What about during those extracurricular activities? What about during in the hallway, in between classes, etc., etc.? Well, here it gets a little bit better. Okay, it's a little bit better. Non-school activities. By non-school activities, I mean literally unrelated to school at all. It's just, and people think, why do you even have that if it's not related to school at all? Well, because, again, these are all driven by actual court cases. And court cases in which somebody said, hey, they're a teacher. And even though it was, at the grocery store, during summer break, and had nothing to do with school at all, just the mere fact that they're a teacher and they're engaging in religious expression, we think that can be imputed to the school, that's the school, that they're still speaking on behalf of the school. Well, no, it has nothing to do with the school. I mean, then by that logic, anytime anybody speaks, they're talking, if you work for AT&T, then, hey, if I go to church on Sunday, well, somehow AT&T must now be saying everybody has to go to church. No, it doesn't make sense. That argument doesn't make sense. But again, because we're dealing with a government entity, if we're talking about public schools, so they're a government employee, there are those out there who argue that anytime a government employee, anytime, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, engages in religious expression, there's somehow, the government has to say, no, you can't do that because of that, going back again to that definition of neutrality. They only look at you can't show any favoritism for that. And that gets back to one of my original points of how we got here, is that's some of the misinformation that we're seeing, is that there are organizations out there that push that information and say, no, you can't show any religious expression at all, anytime, if you're a government employee. Well, that's absolutely not true. And thankfully, our courts at least get this area right. That if it's a non-school activity and you're engaging in religious expression, you're a private citizen. You can, the example I give is, people always ask me, well, how are you able to do what you do for Liberty Institute if you're still in the Marines? I say, I'm a Marine reservist. We're like, well, but you're still a Marine. Well, yes, we always say once a Marine, always a Marine. But as a reservist, if I'm not on active order, when you're on active duty, you belong to the Marine Corps 24/7, 365. When you become a reservist, you only belong to the Marine Corps when they pay you. So that's the easiest way to put it. And so if I'm not getting paid by the Marine Corps, then I'm a private citizen. I can say whatever I want, including I can talk about the president if I want, because that's always the big thing, right? It's like, can you say that? You're not allowed to say that about President Obama. Why not? I'm a private citizen. Do I not have those rights? But you're a Marine. True, but my pay stub doesn't say United States Marine Corps right now. It says Liberty Institute, and as long as Liberty Institute's fine with me saying whatever it is that I happen to say, then it's all fair game. So, likewise with a public school employee, during non-instructional and non-school activities, you're a private citizen and you're free to say, to express your faith. Now, what about baccalaureate activities, or as some say, baccalaureate activities? So, is anybody in here familiar with ceremony? Is anybody in here familiar with a baccalaureate ceremony and what it is? Traditionally, I didn't have one at my school, but I went to a very large public school in Houston. So when somebody explained it to me, they said, well, it's when a church hosts a ceremony in honor of a graduating class. And I thought, oh, okay. And just for whatever reason, the term for that is baccalaureate ceremony. And the question has come up repeatedly: can teachers, educators, administrators, etc., participate in those? Are they allowed to go? Well, my gut tells me, just like with non-school activities, if it's not during the school day, if it's completely it's on a weekend or whatever, yeah, why not? Well, no, that's been challenged. There have been people that say, no, teachers can't go to baccalaureate ceremonies, that people are going to think that the school is religious, or the school supports religion. Well, as ridiculous as that argument sounds, that is an argument out there. So it needs to be addressed. And thankfully, our courts have said, yes, teachers, just like during non-school activities, if they go to a baccalaureate ceremony, as long as they're not going there and saying, on behalf of such and such school, we celebrate you, because now you're again pulling in that whole official endorsement. You're making it sound like the school is speaking in its official capacity. But if you're going there as a private citizen and saying, look, I know that Monday through Friday from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. or whatever, I'm your teacher, but I'm here on Saturday evening or Sunday evening or whatever it happens to be to tell you that I'm proud of you. Simply as a person in this community, I want to celebrate what you've accomplished and to see you do well and wish you well in the future. Something like that's a very honorable thing to do, and is perfectly acceptable under the law. What about student-led religious activity during non-instructional time? So again, I know that lawyers, we love to delineate all and split our words down and say, well, okay, and my wife goes crazy when she asks me a legal question, and she knows inevitably the first two words out of my mouth are going to be, it depends, right? It depends. And she just rolls her eyes and says, there he goes again. But, so she says, the question is, well, can a teacher be involved in a after-school religious activity? Well, the response is always, it depends. So first of all, I heard you say after school. So I assume that means non-instructional time, which is what we're talking about here. It's non-instructional time. It's not during, the classroom activity, etc. Is it student-led or is it teacher-led? And that's a big distinction there. Because if it's student-led, then for the most part, teachers can participate with one really big exception. The teacher should not take what we call an active participatory role, meaning that the teacher should not be initiating or leading any of the religious activity. So really, I call it, the teacher's just kind of latching on to what the students are doing. And a great example, this is one of those gray area ones. But the question that I often get is, okay, well, what about, Mr. Barry, what about after a football game and all the players huddle up and want to pray, or right before the football game, probably more important, right? Right before the football game, the big game, all the players get together and they huddle up and they want to pray, and they look over and they see Coach standing there. Hey, Coach, come on, we're going to pray. Come join us. Right? Can the coach join them? It's like, well, it depends. The first thing I would say is, during the football game, actually is now, as crazy as it sounds, that's actually more on the instructional time than the non-instructional time. Because yes, coaches are coaching, which is considered instruction. So, okay, all right, what about see you at the pole? Okay, now that's a better example. See you at the pole, as most of you, if not all of you know, is they are very, very careful to make sure it's during non-instructional time, right? It's before the school day even begins, right? So that there's not even a chance anybody could say, oh, you're doing this during the school day, the school's endorsing religion now, and it's unconstitutional, and you got to stop. Nope, before the school day even begins. These students are waking up before they would ever dream of waking up to get out there to meet each other at the pole and pray. Well, can they invite teachers? Can they invite coaches? Can they invite principals, vice principals, superintendents? Absolutely, right? Well, can those employees attend? Yes, as long as they don't initiate it or lead it, right? So I always pick on the football coaches, right? So the head football coach can't get out there because they're typically the type A kind of alpha dog personality, right? Head football coach can't walk up and say, all right, folks, glad we're all here to see you at the pole. Let's bow our heads and pray. That would be obviously an issue because now they're initiating and leading it. But if they just walk up and the students are out there, maybe it's the student body president, maybe it's Miss Congeniality is up there leading that prayer, and the coach just happens to wander up and bow his head too. There's no problem with that. He's engaging in religious expression, but he's allowed to do so under the law because it's student-led and it's during non-instructional time. And the coach is not taking an active participatory role. It's just latching on, as I say. What about other types of school activities, such as graduation, prom, right? Can there be religious expression during those? I need to back up 1 second on the student-led religious activities. There's another one that when we talk about non-instructional time, what about after-school programs? I talked about the kind of the see you at the pole type of scenario. What about after-school programs? The just Bible studies. I'll use as a general catch-all category. Well, again, as long as employees are allowed to I shouldn't use the word participate. As long as employees are allowed to attend after-school activities that are non-religious in nature. So let's say there's like a fantasy football club or something like that, where they all get together and talk about fantasy football, or there's a book club or something like that. And if employees are allowed under the school district policies to participate in those, then they can also attend the religious activities as well. So it kind of goes back to that, if the school allows similar non-religious expression, then they have to treat religion on equal terms as they treat non-religion. So if there's, an after-school Hunger Games club, paintball club or something, then there can be an after-school Bible club, and employees can participate. School activities such as prom and graduation, again, this is a big caution area. This is a gray area of the law, and this is one where there can't be that implied endorsement that the school district, that the school is somehow endorsing religion or showing favoritism towards that one religion over another. So, if a teacher is asked to go and speak at a graduation, that Treva law that I talked about, where actually it's written in Texas law that says it's student speech, a student speaker speech is their own and it's private speech. Not so much with the educators during a graduation ceremony or something like that. So that really covers some of I talked about some of the basic guidelines, that principle of neutrality, the notion that it's not just you can't show favoritism towards religious expression. You can't be hostile against it either, and that's something that I call them those. I always say those on the other side. And people who are opposed to religious expression in public places, they often forget that you can't be hostile towards it either. Just be neutral. Just saying, I'm neither for nor against it. If a student wants to engage in religious expression, as long as it's consistent with the law, with our school district policies, then I'm going to allow them to do it. I'm not going to be hostile towards them, and I'm not going to give them special, favoritism or preferred treatment just because they want to engage in religious expression. And that's really the safest route you can take. And I hope that by addressing you all this morning, that I have cleared up at least some of the confusion, some of the misinformation, and maybe removed a little bit of the fear when it comes to, can I join a see you at the pole ceremony? Can I share my faith with another teacher? I see so-and-so in the teacher's lounge and they always seem to be upset or depressed or stressed out about something. I want to give them a reason for hope, a reason for the hope that's in my life, for the joy that's in my life. Can I do that? Again, pursuant to the general guidelines that I've shared with you guys today, for the most part, yeah, that maybe, hopefully some of you come away with this thinking, I'm a little surprised. Teachers actually have more rights than I thought we did. I thought we couldn't do anything. I thought we had to walk through the school in a straitjacket. But really, we're allowed to do a little bit more than I thought. So, and here's the thing, is that if we're really wise about how we think about and approach expressing our faith in a public place like a school, if we're really wise about it, then we can accomplish a lot more than I think perhaps even we thought possible in terms of reaching other educators, reaching students for Christ, but in also protecting the Constitution, protecting our laws, and ensuring that we don't set up bad scenarios that create bad cases. There's a famous saying in the law that bad facts create bad law. And often, I'm sure that most, if not all of us, are familiar with the Hobby Lobby case that was recently decided at the Supreme Court. Well, that was one where we had some pretty good facts in those. Hobby Lobby, if you really dig down and look at them as an organization, as a business, it's hard to hate them, unless you have a predisposition to hate certain things that they believe in. But if you're kind of just neutral, or if you're trying to be neutral, like a judge should be, it's difficult to look at them and say, man, they're just bad people. Those arts and crafts sellers, they're just out there doing bad stuff, right? But imagine if that was if Hobby Lobby was an adult bookstore or something like that. Well, bad facts make bad law, but good facts can often help protect the good laws that we have. So I would just encourage you to be wise, be mindful about what you share and how you share it and when you share. And to conclude, I'll conclude with a couple of points. First, at Liberty Institute, we want you to know that you don't have to go it alone. We, as protectors and defenders of religious freedom in America, we're here to, the schools are part of our battlefield, as I pointed out earlier. And all of our representation as a nonprofit organization, we do it pro bono. We do it because we're called to do it, and it's our mission. So this is not something where if Liberty Institute comes to help you, that we're going to be doing it because we think we can get a lot of money out of you for it. No, we do it because this is what we're called to do. Number two, as I just mentioned, my goal and our goal really is to get rid of that fear and misinformation and confusion, especially in our school and academic environments. And please call us if you ever feel that you need legal help when it comes to your religious freedom. If you feel that you're being threatened, coerced, intimidated, told you can't express your faith, you can't have a Bible study amongst teachers or something like that. Anything that you're told that just doesn't sound right or doesn't sound like it comports with what I've talked about this morning, it might be that they're right, and this is one of those weird situations where you're not allowed to do whatever it is that you're trying to do, but it might be that they're wrong and you're right, and you are allowed to do it. And Liberty Institute would be happy to help you with that if that situation arises.